everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. The schedule for upcoming sessions is on my website at lindanickell.com. Every week, a new guest shares their photography tips, an insight into their creative process, and the stories behind some of their favorite photographs. Tonight's guest is Deborah Stevenson. Debbie is a flower photographer based in Pennsylvania. Her Instagram page is filled with delicate petals in every shape and color. Her photographs are fine art pieces that preserve botanical subjects at their very best. In tonight's presentation, Discovering and Capturing the Hidden Beauty of Flowers and Other Botanicals, Debbie will share her journey and talk about her passion for photographing flowers and other botanicals in ways that capture and reveal their hidden beauty. She will also share her process and some of the techniques she uses to bring her creative vision to life. If you're on Instagram, you can find her at D Stevenson Photos, and you can connect with her at dstevensonphotos.com. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Debbie.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And
welcome.
I'm really excited that you asked me to be here and be a part of your happiness hour. And of course, I was not going to say no to you because, you know, I think many of us know we don't say no to Linda.
I love, and that's something she said to me off camera. She says, "Oh, I wasn't going to say no to you." And I think all of you sitting in this room should take note that if you get an email from me, you should say yes, because you know, I will go after you. Pretty good at that. So thank you for making my job easy and taking a message from someone that you don't know. I mean, except for your Instagram, and taking a chance to come in this room and kind of like show your work and talk about it. And your stuff has been floating through my feed for a while now, and it's just one beautiful photo after another. And so I love photographing flowers, but there's so much more I'd like to learn, and you're giving us that opportunity to kind of see what you see. And so I'm so thrilled that you said yes. So
thank you. Thanks so much. All right. Did you want me to share my screen now?
You're ready. And if I skip something in your intro, feel free to, you know, fill in the gaps.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I see some familiar faces in the room here, some of you that I follow on Instagram and have gotten to know. I see some of my friends and family, and I'm really excited that you're all here tonight to spend some time with me. And thank you to Valerie Hoffman. As Linda said, it was because of Valerie that I actually found Linda and the Happiness Hour. So excited to be here. Linda, you really gave a great introduction as to what I'm going to speak about tonight. So I'm not even going to waste our time anymore and reiterate what you just said. I'm Debbie, by the way. You see Deborah Stevenson down there, but my friends and family call me Debbie. So feel free to call me Debbie. And I got started in flower photography for several reasons. I've always loved flowers. I've always had gardens. And I was teaching for many, many years. And during my teaching career, my husband bought me my first DSLR camera and my first macro lens. And I had always dabbled in photography in one shape, form, or another. But he was the one who got me started getting interested in photographing flowers. He thought it would be really nice for us to, you know, have a way to capture the memories of our flowers in our garden. And I started practicing on and off in my summers off from teaching. And I really didn't have a whole lot of time to devote to it because I was raising my kids at the time as well. And at that time, I had really no knowledge of what photography was all about, other than I did know how to use my camera. And I decided that, at some point in the future, I would probably spend more time learning how to photograph flowers. And fast forward to 2015, I retired from a career in teaching and moved to Pennsylvania with my husband. And it was then that I decided that I wanted to learn more about photography. And I dabbled in a few different genres of photography, but my heart and love always came back to flowers. So I took a bunch of online courses, started looking around, buying some books. I bought a book on Lightroom and knew that was going to be an editing program that I would have to learn. And I came across a floral photographer named Kathleen Clemens, who's a Maine-based floral photographer. And I absolutely fell in love with the kind of photography that she did. And I actually attended an in-person workshop with her, and I got to try out some of the Lens Baby lenses. And after that, I decided Lens Baby lenses was something that I wanted to learn how to use and incorporate into my photography. And shortly thereafter, I actually met another floral photographer, Anne Belmont, who was a Chicago-based photographer. And I took an in-person workshop with her, and she suggested that the Lens Baby Velvet 85 would be a really good fit for me, and I had purchased that as well. So really from there, my learning started to just kind of snowball, and that is how I got into capturing and photographing flowers. And it's been a learning journey ever since, and I just keep learning new things and new techniques. And I actually have watched some of the presentations here on the Happiness Hour. I know Kathy Alice, I've seen your presentation on Lens Baby lenses. I mean, it's a great presentation. I am not going to go that in depth on those lenses tonight, but yeah, it's just been a lot of fun. So with that, I would just like to share with you some of the lessons I've learned in the last couple of years while I've been teaching myself flower photography. And so the first one is get to know your subject. It doesn't really matter what type of photography you do, but for flowers, I've spent a lot of time learning about the different types of flowers, what their names are, the different parts of them. It's been a lot of fun even looking into some of the folklore and some of the meanings of certain flowers. I've also learned where to find specific flowers, how to grow them, what their growing and blooming season is like, what they look like in different stages of their life. And so that I feel has really helped me to create better photographs and more impactful photographs. The other lesson I've learned is to take your time. This quote down here that's underneath this photograph of some of the dahlias in my garden is something that I came up with for myself. Flowers reveal themselves to us only when we take time to look. Actually, one of my dear photography friends is on the in the Happiness Hour room tonight, my friend Louisa, and I really learned from photographing with her that before you even pick up your camera, you really need time to walk around and look at all of the flowers and really find that one subject that resonates with you and really take your time and spend time getting to know your subject and how you're going to photograph it. The other lesson I've learned is progress over perfection. It takes a lot of time and practice and a lot of making mistakes and trial and error to really perfect your craft and your vision. And one of the important lessons that I've learned for myself, and I think it's a good lesson for others, is that you really need to use your photographs over time as a benchmark for your success instead of looking at the photographs of other people. The other thing that I've learned is to share your images and stories. And, because we are visual storytellers, and if people are always looking at so many photographs, and if you don't tell a story with your image, it's sometimes hard for people to make the connection and resonate with you. And then also to make sure that you have fun. Linda, how am I doing? I just want to make sure. Can you hear me?
It's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I want to spend a few minutes on selecting a subject, how I go about selecting a subject. And this is a clematis plant from my garden. And when you go into a garden of flowers, whether it's your own garden or a public garden, it can be quite overwhelming because all of the flowers pretty much look the same. Like if you go to different garden beds, if you think of tulips or dahlias, maybe not so much with dahlias because there are so many different varieties, but a lot of times certain particular flowers, if you look at them as a group, they all pretty much at first glance look the same. So one of the things that I like to do is to walk around and see if something catches my attention. And I think about what catches my attention. And that could be something as simple as a petal curl, or there could be some kind of unique feature in the center of the flower. It could be, if maybe they're different colored flowers, it could be the color, it could be some patterns you see. But I always think about finding something unique that captures my attention. And that's really a key for me in selecting my subject. The other consideration I have when selecting a subject is how is the light? Depending on what the light is and how it is, of course, a nice cloudy day is such a great way to photograph flowers. It's like having that, a huge softbox, to as the lighting and filter out all of the sun and the glare. But I don't really over the years, I've learned not to let harsh sunlight or wind or other things like that get in my way of photographing flowers. So, because I always know that I can either use a diffuser to soften the light, or if I don't have quite enough light, I can use a reflector to bounce some light in. I don't use flash. I played around with that a little bit when I first started out, and I absolutely did not like it. So I always try to work with the light I have. Obviously, if you have your own garden, you can go into the garden at different times of the day and use the light to your advantage. I have found that late day light is really beautiful for flowers. Early morning light is very beautiful. So just in your own garden, you can take advantage of the different lighting more so than you can when you visit a garden. I also think about, is the background distracting? If you look at this picture here, you can see a little bit of this black fence that I have, and that is around my whole garden. It's great. It keeps the deer out, but sometimes I don't like it. It looks very distracting. And so then I have to think about, how am I going to deal with that? And I will go over some of that later on in the presentation as well. Sometimes too, flowers, they kind of grow together, they're kind of clumped together, and I like to isolate a flower. And like Linda was saying, she doesn't like to cut a flower. So if you're not going to cut a flower, um, obviously you can't do that in a public garden. You have to think about, how are you going to create an image that does not have a distracting background? And then the other thing that I think about is, do I envision a story? Very often when I catch an interesting flower with a unique feature, I very often will see a story. I might actually attach human-like qualities to it when I create a story. And I will be very honest with you that sometimes I have that story in my mind while I'm photographing the flower, but other times the story does not come to life until I am editing and post-processing my image. So here, the advantage of having your own garden is that you can go out and take advantage of photographing your flowers at the different stages to capture their beauty. So the one on the left is a clematis bud from that plant that I just showed you. And what really drew me into this bud was the colors of that lime green against the purple. And I loved that when I photographed it up close, that you could really see those little hairs and the textures on the bud, and then those little finger-like, I guess those are part of the stamens maybe, they were sticking out, and it just gave me the reminder of birth and new life. And then on the right, these two clematis buds, they were like this. I did not butt them up like this, and it was such a tender feeling of love that I experienced when I was looking at them and photographing them. And then here, getting closer in to this clematis flower. And I just love those finger-like projections in the center that look like they were, rising up and trying to grasp the sunlight. And I also love the texture of the petals that you could see up close like this. And then very often, what I'll do is I will pull back. I usually actually start photographing the flower from a little further away, and then I kind of work my way in, unless there's something specific that I see right away in the center. But this I pulled back a little bit so that I could capture more of the flower, and I photographed it on an angle to make it look like it was moving in the wind, which it really wasn't. And then I added a texture in the background to give that illusion of movement. And this is in my garden also. This is a Montauk daisy. And I photographed this with my 100mm macro lens. And the one on the left, when I saw that petal that was like standing up a little bit, it just, it just looked like it was waving and saying hello. And I just thought it looked so beautiful. And this was in the late day light that I was just talking about. And on the right, a closer up version, getting in even closer, where you could just see that one petal standing up. And just thinking about stories, when I had mentioned that, I had put that photo on the right on Instagram. And I asked people, I kind of told them what my story was, but then I asked them to tell me what did they think of the photograph as far as in terms of story. What story did they see? And different people gave me different versions. So sometimes that's really interesting to do if you're on Instagram and ask people to tell you what story they see in your photograph. This here is an anemone flower that I photographed at an anemone farm that I visit every year in New York. And the greenhouse where all the flowers are in has glass all around it and in the ceiling, so you get some really beautiful light. The light can actually work for you or against you depending on the day that you go. However, on this occasion, the light really worked in my favor to illuminate the center of the anemone flower. And what captured my attention was that one little petal on the right. It kind of looked like somebody waving their fingers saying, hello, look at me and come on over and say hello. And then here, this is a dahlia from my garden one year. I cut the dahlia. I put it on a table in my backyard. And so I had the beautiful ambient light. And this was photographed on a tripod with my Lens Baby Sweet 50 on the Composer Pro with some macro filters. And sometimes I'll even add I have macro converters for that lens. And I just photographed it up close. And it reminds me of a bow and ribbon on a package. And then here, this is a ranunculus flower that I actually photographed on my light pad. This is with my 100mm macro lens, wide open at f2.8, and I call it Eye of the Storm because this I photographed during COVID, and this flower was from one of the florists in my area who had to shut down, and he was giving flowers away for free. So even in the eye of the storm of COVID, there were some beautiful things that were happening amongst people and in our community. So moving on, this is a flower. I don't know the name of this flower. I don't always know the name of flowers, but I photographed this on a pathway. I was walking on a pathway in a garden in Maryland, and I saw this purple flower, and what caught my attention was the yellows, those little yellow centers, and the little hairs that you could see. And I set up my tripod, got in really close with, I believe this was my Lens Baby Soft Focus 2, stopped down quite a bit, and I captured what you see on the left. And the beauty of this is it looked like floral fireworks to me. I know there's not all different colors, but to me, for some reason, I saw floral fireworks. And here, a magnolia flower that I photographed in Richmond, Virginia at a botanic garden. The interesting thing was I had been photographing all day, and I got in my car, and I was sitting in the car with my husband. I was looking at the magnolia tree in front of us, and I said to him, I want to go out and just take a look at that magnolia tree. I want to go look at the flowers. I didn't have my camera in my hand. and the wind was really blowing, and it was like opening up the petals. And when I got a glimpse of what I saw, what you see on the right, I said, I told my husband, okay, I'm going to be here a while because I want to photograph this flower. And I did this with my 100 millimeter macro lens. And I know macro, you typically, to get up close, you go on manual mode. You don't do autofocus. But because it was so windy, I put the lens on autofocus with image stabilization, and I was just, I spent a long time photographing, and that's what you see on the left. And I love it. I thought the beauty of this was that center looks like a pineapple to me. And then you have the arced curve of the petal that's framing that photo. I thought it was just really beautiful. And then here, an anemone flower, oh no, not, excuse me, an anemone flower, peony flower from my garden that I cut. And I actually brought this to my daughter's house when I was visiting her. And she has a front porch with some beautiful lighting. And I loved the way the light was coming through the petals. And I loved the center of the flower, the way it looked. It reminded me a little bit of a sea anemone. So I guess this would be my version of a floral anemone. And flower buds are really beautiful to photograph, and there's a lot of beauty to be found in flower buds. This flower bud is a peony from that same flower. I mean, it might not be the exact same one, but one of the flowers in that flower bed of my peonies that I photographed after a rain. And, getting water droplets on flowers always gives you some beauty to be seen. And if you don't have the water droplets after rain, of course, you could always use a spray bottle in your own garden, not in a public garden. And here, this is a dahlia bud. This is a tequila sunrise dahlia in my garden. When I saw this, I absolutely fell in love with it. Before I even photographed it, I love that one petal sticking up on the right. It was just a symbol of, life emerging, this one petal standing up, waiting for all the others to join it. And I did put a texture on the background that I created in Photoshop. A lot of the photos that you're seeing have textures that I've done in Photoshop. And here I photographed this at Longwood Gardens. And when I saw this flower, and again, I don't know the name of this one, but it reminded me of a woman having her portrait done, tilting her head slightly to the left, and then with all her beautiful hair just coming out of her head, and then that one little petal curl looked like, to me, it reminded me of a woman taking a piece of her hair and just tucking it behind her ear. It was that petal curl that really caught my attention and wanted me to photograph it. And I believe this one was with my Lens Baby Velvet 85. And this cosmos flower, this was at a flower farm in Virginia. And I saw the little petals sticking up in the center. It was slightly windy, but that was the beauty of it because it really made those outer petals look like they were dancing. And this sunflower that I photographed last September in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, at a sunflower farm. So thinking about selecting your subject, this was a 300-acre sunflower farm. I obviously was not going to walk 300 acres, and it was super hot and humid that day, so I knew I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time there. And a lot of the sunflowers were very, very droopy looking. But again, I took my time in the area that I was around to find something that captured my attention and really drew me in. And this one did, because if you look to the right, those petals are folded over on the face of the sunflower, and it made me think about, somebody that's shy. And then I loved the way the light was filtering in from the back to illuminate those petals. And I titled this one Radiantly Bashful. And I did enter it in a juried photo competition, and it won Best in Show. So that was really exciting, and made it a very special, memorable image for me. This cone flower was in my garden. And again, I'm always attracted to flowers that have water droplets on them after the rain. But what really spoke to me here was that, I guess it's part of the leaf on the bottom. It looks like a hook. And I titled this one Hooked on a Coneflower. And sometimes when you're looking for something unique and different, thinking about the shape of a flower. There's a lot of flowers that you look at and you can find heart shapes to them. And this was a very unusual looking muscari or grape hyacinth plant that was growing in my garden one year. They're very small. They're only a couple of inches tall. And I looked at it, and at the top, you really have to use your imagination a little bit sometimes, but I saw a heart. And that is what really drew me in, and I spent time photographing it to create this image. I did put to the right so you could see what I was talking about with the heart. And on the left, some hearts again, these little viola, I think they're violas or violets, that I photographed on a pathway at a garden in Virginia. I actually had to sit down on the ground to get these. This was, I believe, with my Lens Baby Soft Focus 2. I've really fallen in love with that lens. I don't use my 100 millimeter macro lens very often anymore. I turn to my Lens Baby lenses to do that. And I just loved the heart shape and then how I was able to get that back flower and the background in a nice soft focus. And on the right, a tulip. If you're lucky enough and you look carefully, a lot of tulips will have a heart shape on them. I don't find them very often, but I found this one in a garden in New York at an arboretum, and I believe this was my Lens Baby Velvet 85. I think it was about F4. And what I really loved was the color of the tulip, but I loved that there was some purple muscari in the background with their green leaves, and they were far enough back, and at that aperture, I was able to get them to blur out. I did put a little bit of a bokeh texture on there, but it was nice that I could do most of it in camera. And then thinking about photographing flowers, the centers. So I found that when I first started out, I tended to photograph flowers, more focusing on the center of flowers. So that's why I put this image here as a reference for you. On the left, that's a bunch of the columbine flowers that I grow in my garden. And so I went out one day and I photographed what you see on the right. But I kept on thinking, this is kind of like really standard and typical of what you would see. What could I do and how could I photograph them to show the beauty of them in a different way? So I spent quite a bit of time out there, and it was super windy, but I did not let that deter me. And I ended up with this image. And this is the back of that flower, one of those flowers. And I just loved those pouch-like structures that you see. Those, I guess they're part of the petal. They're pouches. I guess they're pouches, and the way that they were intertwined. And then I have all of the rest of the petals going out in a soft focus. So something to think about is don't disregard the backs of flowers when you're going out to photograph, because a lot of beauty can be found there. And then this dahlia in my garden, after I took this photo, I made sure that I would always go out and, check the backs of the flowers as well, because there is a lot of beauty to be found. And this is a very soft image, and that was just my vision for it. And here, these are Himalayan blue poppies that I photographed at Longwood Gardens. They come out every year in March. They're only around for about 2 weeks. And I know, like Valerie, I know you've been there. And I think, Kathy Alice, you've probably, I know you photographed them too. A lot of photographers, flock to get to the Himalayan blue poppies. And what I like about it is that I've been able to capture them in their different stages. I find that that's easier for me to do at home in my own garden, but I've started trying to find that when I visit other gardens as well. And sometimes you may have to revisit a garden more than once in a short amount of time to be able to do that. So the one on the left is obviously the bud of the Himalayan blue poppy getting ready to emerge. And I photographed it with my 100 to 400 millimeter telephoto lens. It was kind of way back in the garden area where they had planted it. It had a lot of distractions in the background. And I know those of you that photograph the Himalayan blue poppies at Longwood Gardens, you know what I'm talking about. And then I added a texture that I created in the background to take away from that distraction. And then on the right, with one of my Lens Baby lenses, I got up really close and just put all of my focus in that center of the flower with more of the blur surrounding it. And actually, this one, after I created it for some reason, and I did post it on Instagram, I thought about Elton John's song Blue Jean Baby. I don't know why that came into my head, but that's what came into my head. So I call it my Blue Jean Beauty. And then again, the back of the flower to find that beauty. When I saw this, I love those little hairs on the stem and then all of the softness in the petals surrounding it. So it's kind of like a contrast between the sharp and the soft here. And then on the left, more of a floral portrait of the Himalayan blue poppy and with a texture that I put on the background. And I think that was my 1 to 400 millimeter lens also. And then again with the Lens Baby lens, getting up really close to just put the focus right in the center there, and then everything else nice and soft. And I love the color of this one. It's kind of like a baby blue. And then I did something similar where I photographed the different parts of the flower. This was actually in my mom's back patio out in Arizona when she was still living there. She was growing these cacti flowers, and I had recently gotten my Lens Baby soft focus too, and I brought it with me when I went to visit her. And I had my extension tubes and my macro filters and my macro converters and had those along. And so I just spent a couple of days photographing these flowers. And the one on the left, I actually did, I know that really a lot of people say, why would you do that with a Lens Baby lens? But I actually took 2 photographs to focus on the centers of each of the flowers because I still like that blur that was created by the Lens Baby lens. And then I stacked them together in Photoshop. The one on the upper right, I got in really close to capture the beauty of the colors, the magenta, the lime green against the orange petals. And if you look really close, you can even see the beautiful shades of pink coming through on some of those orange petals. And then on the bottom right, a cacti bud, flat starting to flower, and then just all of that softness in the background. And then at the Pittsburgh Botanical Gardens, I did a similar thing. This was with my 1 to 400 millimeter macro lens. And I wanted to just focus on seeing how I could create a series of images to show the different parts and stages of this flower. This is a Japanese anemone. So the one on the left getting in really close to show the center of the flower. The one on the upper right, the flower bud with the blooming flower, which I love when I find that kind of combination, a bloomed flower with a flower bud. It always reminds me of the love between a mother and child or a parent and child. And then on the bottom right, the Japanese anemone just starting to open up, which for some reason that the way the petals are, it reminds me of a baby's bonnet. And then last year, I went to 2 rose gardens, one, the Bethlehem Rose Garden and the Allentown Rose Garden with my friend Louisa, who is here tonight. And we spent quite a long time photographing. And I find roses to be a challenge to photograph. There's so many layers of petals. And in the past, years ago, I'm talking about, I had photographed roses trying to get everything in focus. And I don't think they're a flower that they look as beautiful when you do that. So this is with my Lens Baby soft focus too, photographing a little bit wider open so that I just get the edges of petals and then everything else in a soft blur to really give it a nice soft and ethereal look. And then getting in a little closer on the roses, the one on the left, really having a lot of blur going on, a lot of softness, but I just loved the way the edges of I only got the edges of a few petals in focus to just give it, again, a nice soft and ethereal look. And then on the right, this rose a little bit closer up and having more in focus in the center. But what got me on this one, what really caught my attention was the colors. And looking at it like this and photographing like this, it almost makes you think it's like a watercolor painting. And then this rose, I was walking and found this rose, and I decided to sit down, and I was just sitting there looking at it, taking my time. Like I said, I find it very meditative to do that. And I used my Lens Baby, I think it was my Lens Baby Velvet 85, and I used it at about, I think, f4. I don't really go to lower than that most of the time, but for this one, I think it was f4. And I loved what I saw in the background. You could see a hint of those other flowers. They were really blurred out. And I did put a texture on this in Photoshop, but I love the light that was coming through, and it just made it look like it was the main flower with a beautiful community of flowers in the background. And here, these two are begonias that I actually bought at a garden center in Virginia. And I took them back to my son's house and put them on his back patio. And it was just beautiful end of day light. And I set my tripod up. I used my Lens Baby Soft Focus 2 with some of the macro adapters. And this is what I was able to capture. I love the beauty of the light that was falling on the petals on that white begonia that you see on the left, and how it illuminated that center. That center almost, I don't know, it's like it almost to me has like a jewel-like quality to it, like a gem. And then on the right, the pink flower, the pink begonia, those petals to me remind me of a ballerina's dancer's tutu or ballerina's dress. And then this ranunculus flower on the left that I photographed close up with my Lens Baby Soft Focus 2. I love the light that was coming through. This was at the anemone and ranunculus farm where I went. And then on the right, this tulip, what caught my attention was the yellow edges on the petals. This was at a tulip farm in Virginia. I've gone back subsequently several years, and I've never seen a tulip like this before. And again, and I love the petals, how soft they were. It kind of reminded me like a shawl being wrapped around somebody's shoulders. It just has a beautiful, soft look to it. And now thinking about the hidden beauty of petals. This is a dahlia flower from my garden that I cut, and I photographed it indoors, the photograph that you see on the right. I had used some mylar to create that photograph. What really attracted me to this flower initially was all of the red spatters of color on the yellow petals. And I actually thought it looked like nature had taken her paintbrush and just splattered paint all over those petals to create that beautiful look. And as I was photographing it, I kept on noticing that one little magenta petal sticking up. And that's when I decided, you know what, I have to photograph this flower up closer to see the beauty of that one petal. And that's the photograph that you see here on the left. And on the right here, you see a further away photograph that I initially took of this ranunculus flower. I fell in love with the layers of petals that reminded me of the soft layers that you would see on a dress made of chiffon fabric. And after photographing it that way, I thought, you know, I wonder what it would look like if I got in closer to those petals. And that's what you see here on the left. This is petals up close from a dahlia flower in my garden. I just love the shape of what I saw when I photographed it up close. I thought it looked really beautiful, and I just loved those little striations of pink being pulled through all of those petals. And this dahlia was from my garden last year. It was the end of the season, so I had cut a bunch down, and I put this on a table after a rainstorm and photographed it up close. And this is the beautiful, vision of what I saw. And I really love not only the water droplets, but how you could see a little bit of yellow coming through the petals. And then this is a cafe au lait dahlia from my garden. This is a little bit different. What I did here was I actually took two photographs. One was an in-camera motion photo where I moved my camera. And then the other one was a still photo that I was able to capture that white petal and get it in focus. And then I took them into Photoshop and put them together. I know you can do multiple exposures in camera, and I've done that in the past too. But for this particular one, I did it in Photoshop. And actually, that white petal that you see when I had originally photographed it, it was flipped the other way, and then I flipped it around in I think either Photoshop or Lightroom, and I do that sometimes, and I would encourage you to do that. Sometimes you take a photograph of a flower and you have petals or something facing one way, and sometimes it's interesting if you flip it another way, you might actually like it better, and it also tells a different story. And then it's not always about having a flower that's in its perfect state. There is beauty to be found and revealed in a flower that is not perfect. So the hidden beauty of imperfection. And this dahlia was kind of at the end of the season, losing its petals, but I still thought it was beautiful because of all those colors, the yellow and the orange, which kind of, reminds me of a sunset. And another dahlia in my garden that was showing its age. But this one, for some reason, reminded me of a sunflower. So it's, I guess, my version of a dahlia sunflower. And if you look very carefully at those petals around the center that are still closed, there's a little bit of pink to the edges. And I just thought that was really beautiful in contrast to the yellow color. This dahlia I found at a flower farm in Virginia. And what initially attracted me to this flower was the colors of the petals with the pinks and the yellows. I just thought it was really pretty. And even though it was missing a few petals on the left-hand side, I still thought it was an absolutely beautiful flower. And those petals in the middle obviously had not opened yet, so I titled this Blossoming Beauty. This black-eyed Susan, I photographed this at a place called Settlers Inn near where I live. It's like a B&B, and they have a garden in the back. So I spent some time back there, and I found this black-eyed Susan. I photographed it like you see on the right. What intrigued me about this flower was that there were only 3 petals left. And so I photographed it, and when I had it in my computer, I was looking at it and I thought, it really reminds me of the aging grace as someone ages, and that, even as we get older, we can still be dancing through life and enjoying life. And so I wanted to create the image to reflect that vision that I had. And I took the image into Photoshop. I used one of the filters. I think it was the twirl filter, and I used that to manipulate the petals and the stem so that it would look like this flower was dancing. And then I also put a texture on it that I created. And I did hear somebody here on the Happiness Hour mention something, oh, it's wildflower season. So it's not always about finding the beauty in flowers in your own garden or a public garden, but if you go out on nature trails, there's a lot of beauty to be found as well. This is it's called a white campion or silene flower. And I saw this on a nature trail that I went hiking with my husband with. We went out for a walk, and of course, I always bring my camera. And I came across this flower, and it was very, very unique looking to me. I like that green balloon-like structure with those little hairs on it, and then how it had like a flower getting ready to. It made me think of like those poppers that at parties that you find where the flower is just going to go popping out of that balloon-like structure. And it was very, very windy that day. It seems like I feel like I get some of my better photographs when it's windy for some reason. But I wanted to get that balloon-like structure with the hairs more in focus and then have the softness on that flower. A milkweed. Those are always fun to photograph, can be challenging as well. But I was able to photograph this in a way to show the beauty of it's called milk floss. I looked it up. Those white threads, those are called milk floss. And I just thought they were beautiful against the brown color of the seed pods. And ferns, fiddlehead ferns. One year I actually went on a fiddlehead expedition with my camera and my husband, and probably spent, I don't know, a couple of weeks trying to find different types of fiddleheads and photograph them. And this was one of my favorite ones that I photographed. This was near Shahola Falls in Pennsylvania. There's some waterfalls there, but this was on a path, and they were really low to the ground. So I sat down on the ground. I had my 100 millimeter macro lens. I can't tell you, I did this handheld. I took 2 photographs, and then I put them together in Photoshop. I wanted to, even though I like softness in my images, for some reason for this, I really wanted to show the detail. So I stopped down with my aperture so that I could, see everything more in focus. And I call this one Feathered Fiddlehead. This fern I found in a patch of ferns at a place called Gray Towers in Pennsylvania. It's a historic site. And this was the only one that was curled and looking like this amongst all the others that were standing tall. And I just thought it was so interesting. And it was just a symbolism of life unfurling. So thinking about how to overcome distracting backgrounds. I know that some of you here, and it could be for other people as well, you don't use Photoshop. So one of the things I did, this is before I really got better at Photoshop. This is in my garden, and there were other flowers in the background, and I have the fence. So I took a thin piece of canvas that I bought at the craft store, and I painted the background, and then I put this behind the flower, and I took this photograph. If you don't want to do painting on a canvas, you could paint on paper. You could do it with watercolor. You could buy a piece of scrapbooking paper at the craft store. They sell tablets of scrapbooking paper, and then you could just put it behind your flower to avoid some of the distractions. And I guess the icing on the cake on this one was that there was a nice bee there letting me do whatever I wanted to, and just, staying there posing for the photograph. Another thing that I've done is I bought a piece of thin metal at an antique shop. This is what it looks like. And then I've used it to put behind my flowers. So this is a snowdrop flower in my garden in spring. And I have the fence behind there and some other flowers. So I just stuck this behind the flower and I photographed it. I did blur it out somewhat in Photoshop, but I really liked the way that the colors complemented the flower. And I really was attracted to this flower from that, like the green on the middle that you see on that middle petal. And again, using your imagination, to me, it looks like an upside down heart. And then the Lenten rose in my garden, they can be a challenge because if you know anything about Lenten roses, they kind of grow bushy and it's hard to separate and isolate them. And I really don't like to cut them off. I know you can, but I didn't want to do that. So I put that piece of metal behind the Lenten rose, and then photographed it and created this image. And this is a column stock flower that I bought at my local florist. I love this flower, the colors, and I love the way there was the bud and the open blooming flower. And I had to really think about how was I going to photograph this so it didn't look distracting. And what I did was I took a blurred out picture of the flower that you see on the right, and then I put it together in Photoshop. Now I probably, I cut some parts of that distraction out that you saw in the other picture, but this is what I was able to create. And it just, again, it gives it a very ethereal look. It kind of reminds me of in portrait photography where they make their subjects have that like ethereal glow and ethereal look to the skin. And a dahlia in a garden. I loved the backlighting on the petals, but the background was really super distracting. This is not in my own garden. So what I did was I actually took some brushes in Photoshop, and I took that photo, one of those photos of that flower, and then I just created this texture from it and then put it together to create this. And again, I loved, you could really see the softness of those shades of yellow coming through the pink petals. This is a peony in my garden. And what I did was I cut the peony and I put it in something called a flower frog. They're usually made out of metal. They come in different shapes and they have prongs, and you can fill it with water so that you could put your flower in there and keep it in there for a while as you're photographing, because if you leave the flower out of water, certain flowers will start to wilt very quickly. And then I had this out on my back patio on a table, and I photographed it with a piece of white fabric behind it, like you see on the right. And then I created a texture using brushes in Photoshop and put it together to create what you see here. And this is a miniature dahlia from my garden. I love the colors on here. It almost reminds me a little bit of tie-dye. And the photograph on the right is what you see how it started, and it is beautiful, and the background really isn't awfully distracting because it is rather blurred out. But I took it in Photoshop and I put another image with it for the background, and then I decided to try doing some painting of the petals, and I really like the way the petals look with them being painted compared to the original photo. But I just thought it created such beauty, on the flower and in the background in the background as well, excuse me. And I just wanted to show you this. This is I think it's a dahlia. And what I did was I actually had this in Lightroom, did my basic edits, then took it into Photoshop and created what you see on the bottom right. And then took it back into Lightroom. And in Lightroom, in the Develop module, Adobe has something where you can go in and try different color versions of your photograph. And then, and this one that on the upper left is called Vintage. You can also use the color grading in Lightroom too to do something similar. But it's kind of like Adobe has given you some presets, and you can do it that way. And what I do sometimes with my photographs, I don't do it all the time, but sometimes I'll make virtual copies of my image, and then I'll try different color versions. And very often I will like something different than what I originally created. So it's fun to experiment and explore. And then I just want to share a couple images with you where I really saw the hidden story as I was photographing that came to life. It wasn't something that came after the fact, that these images really resonated to me even before I actually photographed them. So this is a cactus blooming, leaning against a prickly cactus that I photographed in Arizona years ago. And it just reminds me of the support and love that, somebody would get from one another. And I like the contrast of the softness of that flower bud against the sharp prickles of the cacti. This one I absolutely fell in love with when I saw this flower. I unfortunately do not know the name of this flower, but I found this flower at a garden center in Rhode Island where my daughter lives. And it's a very big garden center, and they have an area where they grow flowers. And it was a sunny day, and I saw this flower. And what attracted me to this flower were the petals in the back that looked like prayer hands. It looked like somebody, out worshiping out in the sunshine. And I call this sun worshiper. And the sun really worked to my advantage. It was kind of bright, but it really illuminated everything here. And then I put a photograph with bokeh in the background. This is a lotus bud, and I think it's like a lotus pod. And I was in Rhode Island. There is an area where they grow these lotus flowers. They're right off the side of the road. And I was there photographing. And as I was leaving to go back to my car, I stopped and I looked across the pond, and this is what I saw. And it absolutely took my breath away. I was stunned. I have never seen anything like this again. And I've gone back there many times over the years. And I just love the way that these two were intertwined, like they were embracing. And I call this embracing love. And I did win an award for this photo in a competition as well. This tulip at a garden in Maryland. And when I saw this, it reminded me of somebody wanting to take a nap. It looked like the tulip to me was wanting to take a nap on this soft pillow of leaves. And these two dahlias, the flower and the bud that I've talked about, that I love so much, seeing a flower and a bud. This was at Chanticleer Gardens in Pennsylvania. And I was in their garden area where they grow their dahlias. And I saw these two, and I must have spent over an hour with these two to really capture what I was seeing and I was feeling, the love between a parent and a child. And I also put a couple of textures on this in Photoshop to create what you see here. I wanted to give it a more painterly and artistic look. So that is the end of my presentation. I probably could have shared more pictures with you, but we could have been here all night. But I really thank you for coming tonight. I hope I have inspired you that when you go out to a garden or you go out and you see flowers, you're going to really see them in a new way and really take a closer look to want to discover their hidden beauty. You can connect with me on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram, and my handle is D Stevenson Photos. I love to share stories of my photographs. It might be the vision of a story of what I create, or it could be the story of how I went about photographing it and where I found it. You can also find me on Facebook at Deborah Stevenson Photos. I'm not as active on Facebook anymore. I tend to stick more with Instagram. You can email me at deborah@dstevensonphotos.com. You can go on my website at dstevensonphotos.com. I haven't updated it in quite a long time. I am actually rebuilding it and moving it to a new home. It'll be the same URL, but you can always, check back at any time. And again, I thank you so much for joining me this evening.
So pretty. Let me get you to stop sharing your screen. Somebody texted me during this and said, I know you've got dahlia envy, and it's no lie. I was just sitting here thinking, gosh, so many beautiful flowers and very inspirational. Just I don't know. I'm gonna plant a little bug. I was, as you were telling these stories of these flowers and these petals and this and the stories you see in them, have you ever considered doing like a children's book?
It is so funny that you say that, because my mother keeps on encouraging me to write a children's book.
Your mother's right. Your mother is right. I'm just going to say that because I it it is, the work is beautiful, but the stories, the gentle stories that you have for these flowers and the meaning of them to you, I think that's something very, very special. So I'm just, your mom's right. Okay, so I'm going to help you out. The first purple flower that you said, I'm not sure what the name is. I immediately thought spiderwort, but somebody in the chat said VA, Virginia spiderwort. So maybe you look that up.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
I'll have
pretty
to
sure
look
it's
that
spiderwort.
up.
And
Okay.
then the bright orange photo, the flower that just came up just a few
Oh,
slides.
the sun worshiper that
Sun
I talked
worshiper.
about. Yeah.
I believe that's Tithonia, which is what we call Mexican sunflower. So
Oh, okay.
Tithonia is what I think it is. So I might be wrong, but
Okay.
I I have peony envy and tulip envy and dahlia envy. But what my takeaway, Debbie, was this is the first time I've grown ranunculus flowers, and they were stunning. They're pretty much gone. I cut the very last one today to put in a bouquet for my friend Karen, and I would walk outside and I look at them and think, God, they're so beautiful, but I've just not been able to figure out how to photograph it. And when you shared some of your photos, I thought, oh, that why didn't I think of that? So I'm going to use you as a hey guide to, you know, putting those in my frame and trying that vantage point. So I I love this presentation, but I love flowers, so I'm a little biased. But thank you for sharing your work and coming to this room and introducing yourself to a bunch of people from all over the country. And I noticed today Sarika's in here. She's from India, so but
Wow, that's exciting.
it's usually about 6:30 a.m. when she gets in here. It's her time. So that was kind of fun for her. She mostly photographs wildlife. So when
Ah,
people come in for different subjects, that just makes my heart so happy because you get the opportunity to introduce her to something else, and I I'm so grateful for that. So thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your work and your stories, and I just genuinely enjoyed your presentation. So
thank you.
I didn't see any questions in here, which I'm not concerned about because most of them are going to be some really, really beautiful comments. And I will share that chat with you so you can go back and look and see what people were saying about your presentation.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to everybody who did put something in the chat. I mean, obviously I can't type out and say thank you, or whatever,
No,
but
no.
but thank you so much, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope I get to see some of you. I know it's funny. Last year when I went to Longwood Gardens and saw the blue poppies, I bumped into Valerie. I didn't know she was going to be there. So, I
I
love,
know
let's,
I sent her a message and said, how do I get some of these seeds? So,
oh,
and she
yeah.
says, you can grow them in Texas. And I said, well, I can try. All right. Well, thank you again. All right. Next week, Emmy Award winning director and resident artist Douglas DeVore will be here to present Milky Way photography tips and tricks. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.